Jared and Megan, and I'm just going to restart that over because I saw it. So thank you so much, Jared and Megan, for kind of bringing the invitation for this program to the Howe Library, and for you all for dedicating your Sunday afternoon to this program. It really means a lot to me, and I find a lot of joy and rejuvenation in sharing something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm really, really grateful, and I'm so glad that there's been so much interest. And so I was just saying in the beginning, I think that this program will be a little bit different than the other ones, because I have a presentation to share. It's just a few slides, but the idea is to kind of share some ideas and then have some discussion and dialogue with this group around like how to apply principles of permaculture. But today's specific topic is actually social permaculture, and how we apply the principles of holistic design, equity, reciprocity, equality, and mutually beneficial relationships to the social sphere. And so I'm going to dive into that. But I'm curious, before I start sharing my screen and my slides, while I still have this great participant gallery view, how many of you have been able to attend the previous presentations? And if your screen is on, I can see your hands. Okay. Oh, great. Awesome. That's so wonderful. And then if your screens aren't off or aren't on, you can just, okay, I see hands, or like, I think there's little reaction buttons you can push. Oh, wow. Wonderful. So this group has been here for the whole, I'm so happy about that. Okay. Thank you so much. Julie, I see your thumbs up. Excellent. So grateful. So this, I'm hoping that there's going to be a tiny bit of overlap, but I'm really hoping that we can actually open up together and deepen further in both dialogue and how to apply some of the things that we've talked about over the course of the series. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and I'll dive into some slides just to kind of ground us in my messy desktop. Okay. Yeah, so slide sharing, just to kind of, and I'm sure like not every concept that I share here is brand new to you all. What I'm attempting to do, and what my intentions with teaching permaculture are to really kind of help to give us the language and the practices to really start transitioning into a different paradigm. And I know that kind of sounds a little bit radical, maybe a little bit extreme, an extreme approach, but the way that I see it is that the disconnection that we have experienced from ourselves, from each other, from the planet over the course of, throughout industrialization and colonialization has really led us to develop systems that aren't necessarily inherently healthy for ourselves, for people, and the planet. So as you've heard me say, I feel like permaculture is a really great framework. It's a design methodology. It is a scientific approach that is grounded in principles and ethics that really guide our practices and our intentions to kind of a more balanced life, if you will. It's quite the claim to be making. I've been practicing permaculture for over 15 years, and in the past 10 have been kind of really implementing, creating my own business and doing some teaching on these topics. So I've really kind of sunk into this as a deep practice for myself. And more information about the work that I do with permaculture can be found at my website, and my business is just called Permaculture Solutions. So I really hope that we can stay in touch. And if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love hearing from people and really developing a kind of co-learning atmosphere around some of these things. So here we are. Oops. And our last talk of the series. And so what we're going to go over today is this topic of social permaculture and how we can apply the principles of ethics of permaculture to our social spheres. And as we know, we can design like the perfect system with companion plants and regenerative practices and mutually beneficial relationships and multiple ways to kind of maximize for complexity. But oftentimes, if we're not, kind of approaching it with the right relationships with our coworkers, colleagues, family, friends, these systems can kind of fall apart. And so, and in my experience, over the course of the past 20 years, since I've been learning about permaculture and visiting a lot of different sites, I have found that actually this social sphere gets the least attention, but actually generates the kind of the most tension. And so really, I kind of like exploring and feeling my way into presenting on this topic as an avenue to help us kind of lean into that tension and learn from it, so that we can actually become better at being able to implement our ideas, but also do it in such a way that's diplomatic and can work across difference. Um, because I feel like one of the dominant paradigms that we are really up against is actually is reframing our relationships. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in this presentation. And so social permaculture, we're going to look at nature as a design inspiration. How can we organize our social systems in similar ways that um, ecosystems are kind of designed? And then how social justice fits into this. I really feel that if we are not practicing social justice and working towards social change, we're not really implementing the true meaning and intention behind permaculture. And so one of these topics within this framework is called just transition. And I'm going to dive into that just a tad and give you a sense of what that is, a little bit of an overview, and then how that applies to really creating regenerative change within our social, economic, educational systems. Like this, what I'm hoping is that you can understand how this framework can be applied to actually any system. And then I hope to open it up and really hear from you all. I would love to hear if you're comfortable sharing, who you are, maybe what you do in the world, if you're up for that, up for sharing about that, why you came here, and if you actually got what you came here for throughout this series and also today, of course. And I really like to learn more about you, and hopefully we can have some discussion on how best we can implement some of these practices. So you've probably seen this slide. I always talk about Bill Mollison because he is kind of who's known as the modern day founder of permaculture. And he's basically a white guy, Australian scientist. But what we don't often talk about is how he actually traveled the world and was invited into and worked with Indigenous tribes to really to learn this whole field that already has a really kind of deep-seated theory, practices, and purposes. And this field is also kind of known as traditional ecological knowledge. And that is the term that a lot of Indigenous communities use to kind of share their land practices. Permaculture is a term that came from Bill Mollison and his student scientist, David Holmgren. And what's just often, so sometimes it can create tension within communities that are working across difference, if we do not understand that if we don't really kind of acknowledge that a lot of these principles are not new. These are ancient traditional practices that have they've just been modernized or kind of written into different frameworks and books so that they can become palatable to the Western audience and more accessible to more people. And so the one thing that I like to highlight about this definition is that Bill says the core of permaculture is design in the working relationships and connections between all things. And we're really kind of working from an integrated, interconnected approach with this framework. So I always say that, and even, if you can look up Bill Mollison and learn about, how he was able to kind of be an anthropologist and an ecologist. But we're really grateful to him for synthesizing some of this information. And also we really want to be considerate and not be just like culturally appropriating practices that haven't, been kind of shared with us or given to us. So initially, and I'm just going to be really transparent, we were talking about bringing this discussion and this dialogue to the community. And I really wanted to bring in some Abenaki individuals to share the land practices and where that community is at in terms of like receiving acknowledgement as a tribe, acknowledgement that this land that we operate, that we live, that we work on is really unceded Abenaki territory. And I don't say that to ruffle feathers, although I do believe that it's important for us to get uncomfortable when when coming to kind of question our own relationship with land and with people, because it's not appropriate for us to take information and take knowledge and kind of claim it as our own. So, me as a kind of white middle class individual that kind of came into this information in my 20s, I'm always learning and evolving how to really authentically and kind of humbly honor the people that came before me by, who kind of created this field of practice, but also those people in those land bases where communities were really effectively practicing these things together in a way that benefited the whole system. And so we're going to talk more about social justice and reparations, but that's just a quick intro, because I do love, I love this definition and the recognition that all things are connected. And so this is the beginning of what I hope to do throughout this presentation, is to seed a little bit of information on like, what are some of those seeds that we can be planting to really create a culture shift that is a cooperative, collaborative shift where we're able to kind of raise up and uplift the voices that have been marginalized and some of the communities that have really been holding this sacred knowledge. So this is one of my favorite slides, just to give an overview, because what we're going to be discussing today is social permaculture. And really, it's just looking at how these different 12 principles, we've been talking about how we apply these to our relationship to gardening, to garden design, and to land stewardship and methodologies. And now what we're going to talk about is really how these principles can be applied to social systems and relationships, people relationships. And because they're very translatable. And I think that really, if you're raised with a sense of kind of humanity and humility and reciprocity, these things come naturally to you. And that's a good thing. And I also think it's also good to kind of really name and claim what it is that we're working towards, because we are all so implicated within a system that was really set up to kind of divide us and kind of elevate and shine the light on our differences. And I think that what the work that we're up to do here is kind of finding the common ground and connecting to our full kind of humanity individually, and also with the collectives and the cooperatives and the people that we're interacting with. So yeah, I'll say that. And we've already gone over these a bunch through the course of the presentation, but I want to highlight a little bit number 4 here, because what I realized also throughout the course of the presentations, it says obtain a yield. And what we're really doing is actually we're looking to obtain a lot of yields. So for instance, how that would be applied to the social sphere is like for me today, I'm giving you this presentation, and it's a way for me to kind of practice and synthesize the information that I know and I think is valuable in the world and I want to share. But there's multiple yields that will hopefully come out of this. So I'm doing one action, but really I'm also I'm deepening in my own learning. I'm connecting with a community of people that are interested in things that I'm interested in. There's multiple of kind of maybe connections that could form. So we really want to think of how do we obtain multiple yields, not in a way that's greedy, but in a way that we're becoming efficient with what we're really kind of implementing in our lives. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and all the yields that can come from having this lens. And then applying self-regulation and accepting feedback. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth this time as well, because especially as far as I can tell, most of us on this call are white, and I am going to push us a little bit out of our comfort zone to be able to really have reflection and accept feedback on the ways that our own practices might be replicating harmful ways and harmful systems to people of color, marginalized communities, Indigenous communities, people that have not benefited from the dominant paradigm. And so it's really important for us to be able to reflect and speak truth to the history of oppression, and also accept feedback around really being careful to not let our, what's called white fragility take the front seat. We need to be able to kind of say, you know what? Yeah, the history of the United States is really not as kind of victorious as we might have been told in our history books. How do we kind of look at that and stand on the ground that recognizes that our whole country was kind of, really the wealth was built up in our country through by enslaving people and putting them to work on stolen lands. And so this can be uncomfortable to really acknowledge, but we have to be able to kind of accept that reality and say, okay, given what is our responsibility in this and in the future moving forward? And so there's all kinds of ways we can apply these to social systems. And I'm just kind of giving you some examples of just a couple topics that we'll be diving into. Produce no waste. We can think of like, well, where is my time getting wasted? Where might my time get less waste? Or how can I organize my schedule so that I'm like wasting less time, for instance? Or maybe I need to shift my paradigm and think of what is waste. Like maybe if we're kind of shifting the paradigm out of a capitalist system that really values goods and resources when they're extracted, maybe then we need to shift the paradigm and say, I'm valuable even when I'm not producing, or even when I'm not really busy, or even when I'm making art that's we might think is inconsequential. So anyway, just giving you some examples here of like really how to kind of look at these principles in permaculture and recognize where they might fit into our lives, especially when we want to be good agents of social change and good allies to the BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQA communities. So anyway, as you can imagine, and I'm sure I would love to kind of, we could have like a whole session just looking at all the ways that these principles can be really, grounded in our lives. Integrate rather than segregate. Like obviously this is so clear, and we're going to get into kind of talking about how to do that when it comes to really opening up to different perspectives than our own, and how we can truly listen and integrate those perspectives. But I think I've kind of touched on enough on this slide just to give you a sense of, here's, some principles, and here's how we can apply them socially, not just in our gardens. So what is social permaculture? Here are just a couple of kind of things that I've highlighted from the principles. Oops, I'm just trying to move this so you can see the whole slide. Can you all see the whole slide, or do you see the tool thing at the bottom of the screen?
Tool thing's just gone.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oops, let me see if I can move that. Okay, well, anyway, so social permaculture, it's really applying these design principles to the social sphere, as I said, meeting human needs while regenerating the environment around us. Whew. I feel like when I read that sentence, I just need to let it sink in, because we're framing the possibilities. Because we have to remember, in permaculture, we are guided by this principle that the problem is also the solution. And so, I think relating this to social justice and looking even at the environmental movement, we, coming out of the 80s and even the 70s, when the Clean Air Act and all these things were being implemented, we did not do our best to recognize environmental justice and how important it was to be working for racial and social justice issues alongside of environmental justice. And I really think that's one of the reasons that we've seen the resurgence in the social justice movement around Black Lives Matter, because we have really not fully addressed the fact that we leave people behind, and we're okay with that. And that's really not okay. And systems and policies have been put in place to keep that as the kind of dominant paradigm. So what we're doing here is meeting human needs while regenerating the environment around us. And that is kind of highlighting the interconnection that we have with each other. Because on some level, if there's anyone that's hungry in our community, You may or may not believe in this like I do, but you will be impacted by that. So this is kind of bringing back the wholeness of humanity and our interconnection. So we want to design for difference and for diversity. So what this looks like kind of applied to the social sphere is any kind of committee or board or organization that I'm working with and for, we're really kind of looking like, are all the people that need to be in this conversation here? And if not, why not? Especially when we're doing the work of social change, if we're looking to serve communities or better other people, if they're not a part of the stakeholder group, then there is something wrong with our design process. And we want to be getting perspectives so from all across the different sectors. And so just I'm sure everyone has had some maybe experience working within an organization or a business where obviously there's different departments. And we know what happens if the departments aren't kind of in a cross dialogue, kind of mutually kind of problem solving type framework. And so we're really kind of working towards like thinking who's on the table, what's not being represented, and how do we design for that? And so what that means is then when we do that work and we are then working within groups that have a more representative constituency of people that make up the world, we might also have to do our work of either stepping back and making sure that, like, if, for instance, I'm a white kind of privileged individual, if I'm in a group where there are a difference in race and class and gender, I want to really listen to those experiences because those aren't experiences of my own. And especially if I'm looking to shift systems towards a more just and equitable relationship, we have to really listen to the experiences of those people that the system has not worked for. And what our culture does is we suppress and we kind of take away that validation and say, well, and especially with these issues of class, we are the dominant paradigm, whether we all believe it or not, somehow it's implicated within our being where we have, that person must be lazy. They've been working hard enough. They got to pull themselves up by those bootstraps. Because the more that we kind of break away these systems of white supremacy, capitalism, some of these structures that have kind of led to environmental degradation and social injustice, we really start to see the kind of cracks in the system. And it's important that those people that have experienced those injustices are a part of sharing their experience and building them in such a way that no one gets left behind. And so there's a subtle shift there that I feel like we're experiencing as individual leaders, but also on a large scale. Like, this is not the Peace Corps approach. I'm nothing, well, we just, the Peace Corps, I think we can be critical of it in such a way that says, it's different than like, let's go into a territory and say, okay, I think that this is what needs to happen here, versus really listening and allowing that to come from within and allowing the group to go through a process where it can experience the tension together and move through that tension in such a way where everyone's voice and everyone's presence is equally valuable and heard and kind of brought into the cooperative approach and model. Yeah, and so this doesn't mean that like I think that the nuance in this principle is actually like, we don't want to all just become, it's not like, America has like the great melting pot where we're like whitewashing things and like not celebrating the cultural and rich diversity and histories that so many of us have. And there's a slight difference. We don't want to just like all become kind of an amalgamation of each other. It's like, no, we really want to uplift and celebrate that diversity and allow that difference to really guide the vision forward. And so just a couple of other principles that I really want to highlight when we're talking about social permaculture is having the mentality of abundance versus scarcity. We are driven by a scarcity model. And our economic system is also in the debt, without if with the way that debt has generated and encouraged in our society is a scarcity model. And nature really teaches us to kind of like exhale and remember that there is abundance within natural and living systems, and we are a part of that. And as social human beings, we can also adapt to then be able to kind of redistribute abundance to people that are more vulnerable. The way that this applies in a social system is, giving the excess from our garden, for instance, maybe to a senior citizens collective or a housing cooperative, or making sure that those people that might not be able to kind of produce all of their own food, or are maybe either not working yet, or did not able to not have as much opportunity to work, or are in a different place in their life, that they are also really being brought into the community as a valuable member and asset. Currently, right now, we have elders and senior citizens in our community that feel invisible. We have young people that feel like they're not being heard or listened to. And we really have to be kind of leaning into these places and say, is this how we want to be living? How can we better take care of our young and old in the community? And really kind of generate this abundance model, which, instead of seeing people aging out of the workforce, we honor that transition and say, wow, now you're in a place that you have so much experience, that will you please share that experience with us? So this also relates to senior citizens having an opportunity to be held within their community, and having opportunities for them to share their stories and their experience and their wisdom. And that abundance then can be circulated around into the future kind of generations. Um, and so paying attention to the edges. So the ecological principle here is just that the edges, which means basically that space, which is between a forest ecosystem and a meadow system, for instance, is where the most complex relationships are happening. There's a lot of life, there's a lot of niches being created. And so similarly, we want to pay attention to the edges of our communities. Where are the marginalized people? Where are the people that are that might be struggling, that we want to make sure they understand they're part of our community and they're valued, and we want to hear and learn from them, and uplift their stories. And so these are just ways that we're kind of translating these principles into social systems. And so, and how do we approach those places? I mean, I think we are really seeing just the insurgence of fear right now in our country, and like this division that's happening. But how do we ourselves, how can we do that work so that when we're approaching a situation that is culturally different from our own, how do we integrate with that system? Are we coming with answers and ideas? Are we coming with like curiosity and a sense of openness and learning? And so some of these seem so fundamental and so common sense. I hope this isn't like revisiting kindergarten. I'm really just trying to outline some of these topics so that we can understand that there is a field of knowledge out there that is really developed by in psychology and sociology, and even consciousness studies have all kind of um, impacted and helped to create this field of social permaculture. And oftentimes when I listen to myself talking, I feel like, I'm just wanting to elevate really human kindness, and why we have to develop all these intricate models to kind of get to this, like, can't we all just kind of recognize that everyone really deserves to have their basic needs met, and to be heard and listened to and valued in a community? That's really what we're getting at here. Okay, so learning how to work together. This is like, we learn, like I said, we learn these things in kindergarten, and then sometimes we forget them, and we're like, and we have to really be gentle with ourselves, because we've been implicated in this capitalist system, and the basic fundamental beliefs that have built that system are like this rugged individualism. And so in some ways, we go through this adult phase of our lives really kind of like, I have to make it, I have to do these things to be kind of, to get credit within this world. And now we're kind of, I feel like as a culture, we have to learn how to work together more so now than ever. And unfortunately, we are also integrating with different platforms that really kind of perpetuate our own choral echoing. And that's just one way of saying, I kind of laugh at the Facebook world, right? Like, maybe you're on that, maybe you're not, but sometimes we just end up echoing our same messages to the people that already believe in us, but are we really doing that work to reach across difference and learn and listen to people that do not have the same ideas or perspective or experience as us? I really deeply feel in the core of my being that this work is some of the best and most fundamental and important work that we can be doing right now. Getting out of our own ways. And this also, so this is kind of two-sided, because a part of it is our own individual work. Like, we have to reconnect, especially as white people, when our whiteness has actually been developed in opposition to the other, right? So like, the thing that unites us is that we have been oppressive to, non-white people around the globe, with kind of neoliberal kind of spreading of, kind of democracy and globalization. And I know I'm kind of like dropping some of these big statements in, and I'm hoping that we can pick up on them in discussion, because I want to hear what you're saying. And does it sound too radical? Is this too much to receive? Like, how are we really going about talking about the injustices that, maybe our country and maybe even our perspectives and our opinions perpetuate? So individually recognizing that we need to connect with ourselves, our lineage. Where were the places in our kind of cultural lineage where our people were connected to land in such a way that where people and communities were working together and we weren't just extracting and exploiting? And so for me, that's been a very personal journey of like looking at my ancestors and when was the time that they were living in balance, and how did we even get here? And understanding my story so that I don't then go ahead and easily appropriate another culture that I'm interested in because it's colorful, it's loud, it's intriguing, or however. I say loud because I'm often, really kind of drawn to West African music and drumming, and I love that. But is it mine to claim as my own lineage? No, not necessarily. So I'm going to approach those communities and those perspectives with curiosity and wonder and openness, and know my own lineage. So I don't feel like I have to kind of put on another set of clothes in order to feel whole or important. And really learning from that difference. I think that if we can grow in those ways, we may be on the path to some cultural healing together. So how do we do that? And some of the ways that we do that is really reframing relationships. Because as we know in ecological systems, we're designing to increase the most kind of complex relationships that there are, and the number of interactions that are happening with those relationships. Because what we know is that when they're interacting in ecological systems, the health and the diversity of that system really increases, and it's able to withstand different changes or shocks to that system. Similarly, in our individual relationships, we're really being pushed to adapt right now, especially now with the pandemic. So much of some of us that are maybe more socially inclined are really being forced to kind of adapt and connect with our own selves and find enough stimulation and growth in those places. But anyway, so we're used to thinking of resources and not necessarily services. Instead of thinking about what is the commodity that can be extracted from that, we can think about what are the services that are making that happen, and valuing those interactive relationships within a system. And so we can shift from thinking of commodity to community. And that's just like one example of a way to do that. And then we also are thinking in design and learning from ecological systems that maybe you've all seen that wonderful image. I tried to find it, I couldn't today, but where it's there's a pyramid and it says like ego logical, I think. And then it's like the, human being at the top and all these other, living being animal systems at the bottom, versus ecological. And it's like this circle. So where people there's interacting, but there's no hierarchy. And I think that this is another paradigm that we're really trying to shift, is like, there are power dynamics that accumulate in hierarchical systems that are really harmful to certain communities and individuals. And so if we can value each other just like we would ecosystems I'm sorry, plants within ecosystems, for the beauty and the diversity that they all bring and integrate within the system, then we can, be one step closer to really kind of creating a more, harmonious situation. This also means suspending our own judgments. We might have ideas of how this would look. Like, every kind of project that I come up to, with, I see a number of ways that the design can unfold. But if I don't suspend my judgment or my ideas about what that's going to look like before I really talk with everyone involved in the system, look at what's possible, understand the natural systems that are happening, I might not see the way that the design can really kind of evolve and pop and reveal itself. So it's really important that we're doing that, because I'm also going to throw out another word here, which is we're kind of, I think that we're in this work and in this era of really decolonizing. We recognize that this like colonial mindset has just been so destructive for people and the planet, that we have to really do that work of trying to kind of decolonize our own selves. Like, how have I really implicated the practices of kind of patriarchy, hierarchy, white supremacy into my life? And how can I unravel that? And a large part of that first comes with really unlearning, like learning the true history, and like how, when people were being stolen from, what we now know as Africa, but actually all over the global South, those people were also experts within their communities. They were the growers, they were the healers, because that's what people wanted here. And so that's just when we have to really kind of tell the truth of what it is, and how it was formed. And this isn't in such a way to say, oh, we have to feel like, yeah, we should really feel like not necessarily guilty, but just like that is not right. Like, can we imagine that happening if the tables were turned? And so really kind of approaching it from this place anyway of like kind of ridding ourselves of how we might think of hierarchies and how power is accumulated within systems. And we're going to talk more about that. And so part of this is moving from competition to cooperation. This is another paradigm. And sure, we can think of the survival of the fittest, but also we know, because of the work of James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, incredible ecological scientists, who saw that actually systems that were most cooperative in terms of like recognizing the number of exchanges within that system are actually more healthy than the systems that seems to be kind of where people were observing and seeing competition occur. An example of this is there are species of birds that they were able to recognize, and this work comes from Tom Wessels. He's a ecologist who's a professor at Antioch University. But they were observing a bird that was actually going into a tree and eating some insects. And then they saw another bird come into the tree and started eating some insects. What happened over time is actually the birds evolved to be able to have multiple different species eating from one food source. It wasn't that there was one species that outcompeted them, or that the foods or that the food source itself reduced to then only be able to feed one. And so surprisingly, even in natural systems, we see niches evolving to support more species. This is a paradigm shift. This is different than this idea of survival of the fittest. So again, planting those seeds to a little bit of a different dominant paradigm where we value different parts of the system as equals. So this also involves integrating diverse viewpoints. So again, like if we're sitting on a board or we're working with our families even, and someone says something that's just not popular, it doesn't sit right with you, and they say, well, this is what we need to do if we want to have a more diverse constituency, or to work with more diverse clients, or to change the system of injustice. What I invite everyone to do, instead of reacting to that, if it's something that's different than what you believe or what you've heard of, or it rings a little bit kind of sour for you, just to sit with it and just listen. Because as this work of decolonization occurs, what I've been even noticing in my own self is, instead of doing something right away, really deepening into the power of the pause and saying, or if there's something new and exciting happening within the community and it's so juicy and I want to go check it out, maybe reflect, just pause first, right? Instead of like jumping right in with our own standpoint. I really think that this is the kind of work that we're up to as white allies. So justice in practice, like I said, this really begins with us, and this is what we're here talking about today, is social permaculture as social justice. And so what this involves is asking good questions, questioning our own biases. I've had multiple conversations with family members of mine who grew up in a time where there was segregation. And because of that difference, they developed opinions that where they were led to believe and sometimes took on the belief that themselves that some people are better than others or worked harder than others or were more deserving of the opportunities that they received. So we really kind of have to break this down a little bit and ask ourselves, how is it that we landed in fertile soil to be able to grow and actualize our own dreams? And why is that person not able to kind of access that fertile soil? And there's reasons behind those things. There's policies, there's practices, there's biases, there's racism, and then these things have been implemented in institutional ways and in policies that keep people out of accessing opportunity. Are all members of the groups represented or benefiting, or how are different people benefiting? Every situation that we're in, working within a group, it's a community group or whatnot, how are we asking ourselves these questions? Are you the one bringing these questions to the table? Are they being asked of you? Are they not being asked yet? Are there intersexual power dynamics at play? This word intersectional, yeah, I'm just going to keep talking, and I'm sure many of you have heard these terms before, but I'm going to share them, and I'm going to share my knowledge as if they're kind of new. But so intersectional is a word that came from Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a scholar, woman of color who really kind of wanted to start addressing and looking at the ways that difference is kind of stacked towards either opportunity or injustice. And so basically if the idea here is that our culture was kind of built for white rich men and by white rich men. And so the intersectionality of different people comes from kind of like, what is our race, class, gender, creed, sexual orientation, and how far are these things are far away from the dominant white male. It's not to say there is anything wrong or bad about white men. It's just that that group of people held a lot of the power, made a lot of the decisions that are still driving the institutions in place today and at play. So we have to be able to, when we work with a group, and we have to be able to recognize that there are intersectionality power dynamics at play. And the way to neutralize a platform in this arena, for instance, is to notice these things. We're not colorblind. We're not unaware. We're very aware. We have access to information at our fingertips. There's really no excuse for not educating ourselves on these topics. But also sometimes in a social dynamic, what it looks like is if there is a group of people and maybe it's a classroom and the teacher asks a question or the facilitator wants the group to respond. That if that person has done this work of intersectionality, they might look around the room. If they see a number of hands go up, we want to then be kind of asking the people that would be in that kind of on the top of that hierarchy to step back and maybe listen more, or at least not be the first to speak. And we want to elevate those other voices that are maybe not representative of that dominant kind of that on the top of the hierarchy. And so there's ways that we can kind of elevate voices that might be traditionally marginalized and just check ourselves to make sure if we're normally people that talk a lot, let's listen more, and just to keep that kind of balance and recognize that. And this has been at play, and like some of these practices have been implemented in our systems. Like for instance, when people of color are kind of like, we would check these boxes and they get into college, universities, and then they have to deal with a group of people thinking, oh, you just got in because of the diversity card. We really have to break down these systems and recognize that we need to be working towards equality and justice, and recognize that it's going to be a messy process, but there's a lot of tools for us along the way. And so another quick question is just like, I want to bring to the justice and practice topic here is, can the process that we're engaged with also be a process of healing? And so what this just kind of elevates is the fact that like naming individual and collective trauma from colonization can be really helpful. because, I've studied and been following the work of Sherry Mitchell. She's a Penobscot Indigenous lawyer. And, she has really created and done really incredible work to elevate this narrative that, settlers and Indigenous communities are tied. We actually experience similar trauma through the process of colonization. It has manifested differently in different communities, but we are connected through that that trauma itself. So how do we get beyond that? We start validating people's experiences for what they say they are, instead of saying, oh, that could have happened, or oh, how could that have happened, or you must have done something. Those are all our internal biases that really prevent us from kind of moving into this place of across difference and actually getting to that work of being able to, for instance, work with people that might not see things the way that we do. And this might even include, my politics are kind of progressive. And so the work for me in this area is to kind of try not to really demonize people that might have voted for Trump. Like, are there ways that we can kind of come to a common ground and recognize that there's so much divisiveness that's really being put out there that is averse to our own humanity? So this is just speaking to that dominant paradigm and how do we really uproot injustice. Part of it involves looking at the values that just inform each system. I've used the word paradigm quite a lot here. And what I want to reference is that a paradigm is basically a system that is reinforced by the beliefs and practices and actions of people within that system. And so it's a whole field. It's an incredible field of knowledge. But some of the idea is that in order for a paradigm to shift, some of the people that are in those positions of power that hold those beliefs, they really have to kind of evolve out of the system in order for the new system to emerge. And so again, I feel like this is the naming process of like that threshold that kind of we're living in this time, is how to like have one foot in this dominant paradigm. Like, for instance, capitalism, we understand that it's like has destroyed our economy. I'm sorry, it destroyed our environment and our social structures in a lot of ways, and like our healthcare system. But we're still there. We still use money as a form of exchange. And it's not necessarily that we need to go back to some kind of old system, but how can we really evolve forward and move into this realm of reciprocity, equality, and justice? This can happen. And so we're going to talk a little bit about just transition and how we moving from, for instance, the values of dominant paradigm into the values of a just transition will really help all of us. And so this is kind of getting out of this idea that like, there is a hierarchy to race, or there's a hierarchy to gender, or any kind of way that you can break kind of cultural or, socially kind of constructions apart. So we're moving from patriarchal, where, the male, or the male perspective is kind of the one that is kind of dominant, and to a non-hierarchical perspective, everyone has an equal and important value and inherent value in our society, our families, our structures, our workplaces, everywhere. We want to move from an extractive and exploitative kind of economy to one of reciprocity, where we're designing in reciprocity, and we are actually really bringing this in, even in terms of reparations. In order to heal the past, we might actually have to acknowledge the fact that our wealth was accumulated at the expense of entire generations of families that worked for free, not willingly, to produce wealth. So we're going to talk about reciprocity and reparations. Individualism, this is one of those things, like as I've started to unpack, even just with this latest wave of social justice and Black Lives Matter movement, I've kind of dove into this idea of like, let's look at what white supremacy is, reading White Fragility and My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa McKenna. I still have a lot of work to do, but I'm understanding those qualities of white supremacy that I had not recognized were a part of me. But the more learning that I've done, I've seen how some of these principles actually make it so that there's opportunities become kind of less accessible to certain people. You have to talk in a certain way. You have to be polite in a certain way. You have to be working for yourself in a certain way. So this is the individualism. This is rugged individualism that we have to start shifting into kind of more interdependent systems. None of us can exist without each other. No one's success has been built entirely on their own. Like, why can't we just start circulating that abundance back into the community and recognizing with a little bit of humility, we're really in this boat together. And some would argue that it is a survival skill to be able to work across difference. And then someone even to argue that, like, we as white people have not had to learn all these other languages, whereas people of color who've come into the community, and Black, Indigenous people of color, they've had to adapt and learn to this language of whiteness for their own survival. So these are important things to consider, and recognize that the beliefs that we have and the intentions that we have lead to the language that we use, which leads to the systems that get created. So we're kind of unpacking that and really reorganizing it. Perfectionism. Gosh, always was so critical of myself for being like, why do I have to, I'm so perfect, like every little detail. This is actually we can look at this as actually very exclusionary. It keeps people from participating that might not have the same experiences, that maybe not have went through the kind of educational system that we have in this country, or that is really promoted rather. And how do we kind of allow ourselves to really dive into this, something that might be a little bit different and uncertain and messy. I am all about really kind of developing systems that have a very iterative process, which means that we're getting feedback and we're adapting. And we want to really shrink that time scale so that we're adapting kind of fairly, regular. We're not getting stuck in our own systems of evolution here. And perfectionism is something that can really keep us stuck. And it can really keep us from seeing different perspectives. And even right now, I'm like, wow, I'm noticing the little differences in my slides. Oh, I have a colon on that one. I didn't do it on that one. Like, maybe there's some of you out there that are, judging me for that. Maybe not. I'm judging myself. But either way, breaking that down, recognizing there's a lot of ways to present and share and integrate and, learn information. So moving from exclusion to inclusion. And this is also, I wanted to share a little bit, because working within environmental and social justice circles for many years, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in around a table where we start to say, okay, well, is everyone represented? No, there's not enough diversity. Well, what do we do? Okay, we go to those communities and say, will you be a part of our conversation? We recognize that our solution is incomplete without your voice. Excuse me, but what we really need to also do is say, well, where are the people that we want to be working with? How can we access that diversity, getting out of our comfort zone and maybe getting rid of the whole table altogether? Be like, wow, this table was built on these old ideas. Okay, now we're not sitting around a table anymore. Okay, maybe we're outside, maybe we're on a walk. Like, how do we get, maybe all of a sudden we find ourselves, at, like, for instance, for me, it was going to Abenaki Day in White River Junction. Now I've been going for years and years and years, and just kind of consistently showing up, going to those places where we are invited into, learning about what their causes are, what their needs are, how they're interacting with communities outside of themselves, and showing up in the ways that they've asked and requested. These are just simple ways of kind of trying to start working across difference, maybe not necessarily inviting them into our spaces, but getting out of our comfort zone and saying, well, yeah, what is this perspective? And personally right now, I don't know, this is something I'm really interested in hearing from you all. Where are you at with this process? And how are you doing this? Because especially being socially kind of, distanced from each other, we really want to make sure that we're not, becoming isolated in our thoughts and our perspectives. But also, what are examples out there where we have kind of had to let go of a personal agenda to show up for another community? This is all a part of kind of social permaculture and really integrating practices of social justice. So I don't like to do this often, but I did do it for this slide where I'm just going to read it, because this is a definition from the Climate Justice Alliance. And I feel like, just similarly, when I came upon permaculture, I had the same kind of feeling when I come upon just transition, like, here is the way. So there's a big field and there's a lot out there, but just transition is a vision-led, unifying, and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. This means approaching production and consumption cycles holistically and waste-free. The transition itself must be just and equitable, redressing past harms and creating new relationships of power for the future through reparations. If the process of transition is not just, the outcome will never be. Just transition describes both where we are going and how we can get there. So if you haven't heard of this yet, I really recommend checking out the Climate Justice Alliance. There's also a whole set of principles of just transition that we're not going to go into. But this idea of like, we can't just move forward without addressing the past injustices. And I think that's one of the reasons why we saw that part of the uprising when it came to Black Lives Matter. At what point, what is it going to take for us to do this? And we're not going to be able to do it societally or community-wide if we can't do it within ourselves. So I think it's really important to read these words. And I actually have this posted on in my desk so I can look at it and reference it, so I can make sure I'm in alignment with this change. This is an example that I got, just from the website that just shows, it's just a visual for those of us that are more kind of imagery type learners. We have an extractive economy. This is something that where, the forest is not valued for the trees until it's extracted. Workers are exploited. The profit shares are kind of redistributed through shareholders versus the people that are actually producing the good and creating the value within the system. To a regenerative economy. So this is what we want to move towards. And so while we're working on kind of like naming the extractive economy, trying to keep coal in the ground, recognizing that we are on a very steep trajectory towards a very uncertain future if we do not shift our economy and into more regenerative practices. We cannot continue to live on a fossil fuel economy. So anyway, so while we're kind of doing the work to name and stop some of the things that the institutions and practices that have been implemented in the past, we're building the new. So we're doing so with caring and sacredness. I think it's okay to bring back some recognition of doing this work is sacred. Working with other people is messy and challenging, and we need to be gentle and caring with ourselves and each other. We need to ground ourselves in purpose and meaning. It's my kind of feeling that we're hungry for this. We want to learn how to get out of our own way and integrate more with more diversity. And having this kind of meaningful purpose in our lives actually contributes to a level of happiness that we might not even know we're really missing. And so this leads into kind of governance. How are we governing ourselves? How are we creating sovereign systems where we're really looking out for all parts of the system, recognizing that when we give to those parts, the whole is also benefited. And so resource regeneration, reciprocity, we're not growing vegetables every year without giving some compost to our garden. That would be silly. But we've done that as a culture, and now we really need to start building back some of these practices. Gosh, I really feel like I'm on a pedestal here. I'm not trying not to be so preachy. So this is just a little diagram I actually made. I'm trying to kind of find more visuals to, I was having a hard time kind of finding some fun and colorful visuals for us this afternoon. So bear with me here, but there's principles, practices, and processes. Some of the principles are like really seeking out and moving into diversity, recognizing that all parts of the whole have inherent value, and there's webs of mutuality, right? We want to be creating webs of mutuality, meaning every part of that system is somehow benefiting and giving back to the whole system. We're getting out of our comfort zones. We're asking ourselves these questions. Who has the power in the room right now? Why do they have the power? Why do people listen when that person talks, but not when that person talks? What's the difference? And really kind of leaning into that and just being curious. Seeking out difference and also reparations. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about just one way that I'm trying to do that with my business this year. And I'm going to get to that in the next slide. Power in the pause. I've also talked about that a little bit. Like we don't always have to just insert ourselves with all of our, you know, kind of ideas. We can think and integrate and actually sometimes follow the guidance of people that we might not necessarily think the same way as. We have to relinquish control and expectations. We do not know what the future holds, and we can design for these things, and we have to recognize that we're not in control of them. And but we can create influences and basically, integrate some of these practices so that um, we might just have a little bit of an impact in creating a little bit more of a just kind of regenerative world. So bringing in a little bit more permaculture language here, just to kind of look at these principles, really how they can be applied to the social sector and the social spheres, like zone 0 being the self, really developing that self-awareness and self-transformation. I think that this has to be where we start from. Um, a lot of change comes from within, and especially if we're up to the work of changing some of these systems, we have to really embody that change. And recognize that there are a lot of different forms of diversity. And so if you are not interacting with people that are different from you in any one of these pies, I highly recommend seeking those people out and spending some time with them. Um, and we're using and validating marginal. So that's the edge effect I've talked about. Designing interventions. So what happens within a system when a power dynamic is at play and no one is saying anything, or maybe when an injustice occurs, how do we address that? And so I'm a really big advocate for actually setting principles and parameters and boundaries for groups to be able to move through a process together so that it can be safe and also not replicate systems of oppression and discrimination. So that means basically designing for interventions. So recognizing that it will happen. We will, some part of ourself that has an implicated, even if we've done the work of learning social justice and learning from movements and unlearning racism, we are all implicated, and there still might be something that comes up that says, oh wow, you know what I just said, I felt a little bit discriminatory, or I felt like I'm a little bit stuck in my own perspective here. We have to be able to name that, and also within our workplaces and our family structures, address it in such a way that we are moving towards a solution. And we're sensitive beings, and it's understandable that we might get our feelings hurt if we realize, wow, I really was kind of racist about that. We really have to move beyond that, though. We have to move beyond our fragility into saying, yeah, we're gonna make a plan. So if someone recognizes that, or that there's any kind of system injustice being replicated here, or not all voices are being heard, how are we going to use ourselves, our privilege, our voice to kind of bring light to that and shift it, which involves self-regulation and feedback. And then having this angle of just focusing on healing and justice and really learning from the experiences of others. We do not do that well in our culture at all. We would rather kind of argue our point versus, and I know this is not always, and I know I'm making generalizations, and we're all somewhere along this path, hopefully doing the best that we can. So what do I have? Okay, so inner transition, this is basically like, what are the aspects of what just transition looks like on the inner sphere? We're really kind of creating spaces that are liberatory. Like we want to liberate people and free our thinking and kind of come up with solutions that are really integrated and wholesome. We want leadership from marginalized communities. Like I was saying earlier, if the system has not been working for people, we need to actually learn from those people instead of making judgments, and actually put them in places of leadership, because they're the ones that really understand how the system is broken. We need to tell the truth about the past and also the situation with the climate. We need to be able to do so with clarity and compassion, um, and um, and be able to kind of move beyond conflict into cooperation. And this looks like learning skills of reconciliation, basic communication and conflict resolution, and restoring culture and tradition. This is different for everyone, but it might just play a part in our own ability to kind of have inner strength to really stand up for social justice. And then outwardly, it looks like ecological resilience, because we're kind of integrating more practices. And the more that we really work across difference, and like personally in my work of agriculture, I have been working and reaching out to the Abenaki people and learning about their land practices and recognizing that, um, there are ways that we can really kind of create some ecological resilience if we're able to adapt to some of these practices and utilize them. Let's see, relocalization and democratization of production and consumption. Like basically, we think we live in a democracy, but there's a lot that we don't actually have a say in, and how our dollars are spent, and especially when it comes to what we're producing. I mean, I was reading, plastics is a really big issue for me, and in the way that the plastics industry has just created so much real, kind of detrimental environmental impact. And only 9% of plastics that are recycled actually get made into other products, and it hasn't actually impacted the point of source production of plastics at all. There is zero decrease in the point of source production for plastics. I know I'm getting onto a tangent here, but I just am saying, like, if we don't, and I also understand that I feel like if people had more, if it was a democratized process, I don't think that people would be voting for the kind of system that produces a plastic spoon that that consumes up to 20 gallons of water just to be produced, and is going to be around for 2,000 years just so that we can use it once when we buy a yogurt or whatever. Like, that kind, whatever produced that kind of a um a a plastic spoon, whatever system produced that has to go, in my opinion. Anyway, and that democratization, of course, kind of can extend out to like food, energy, education, and health systems, hopefully creating more sovereignty, so that we are recognizing that like our health, our food, our education, these things are coming from within our community and are accessible to us, and we have decision-making power around it. There's a real reclamation, kind of at the foundation of this. And I think this is probably where I'll talk about reparations. I've had to do a lot of my own work just to even feel comfortable with this word. Um, Even the word white supremacy, and the beginning of my process of kind of unraveling these things for myself, was very kind of prickly. I I thought to myself, I was not a part. I wasn't an individual that actually took people's land. Um, I was that they may or may not even have been my ancestors. Why is it my responsibility to even be spending my time learning about this? And the more that I unpacked it, the more that I realized, I benefited from those systems. So I benefited from the real oppression and genocide of whole communities of people. So I remember the shifting point for me where I thought, wow, like what a worthy effort to spend one's time, even just understanding that culture that got um, suppressed. What are some of their practices? Like, what happened to them, and where did they go? And because I don't know, like there's a part of my heart that was aching to kind of know that information, and like, what is my presence here? How did that impact this other culture? And so it really became part of a practice for me to look into my community and figure out how can I give back. And it wasn't necessarily because I was being told to, it was just because it felt right to me. I know that I've accessed opportunities and privilege that other people haven't, that don't look like me or didn't have the same experience as me. So I reached out into the community, and I've been working with the Winter Center for Indigenous Traditions, and it's an Abenaki run. They actually have a board of directors from multiple tribes, and they work on protecting land, and especially land that has been used for cultural and ceremonial uses all around Vermont. They have an incredibly rich history of writing and information, and knowledge that was passed down from generations to generations of people, and they're doing really important work. So I decided that I was going to give 5% of all the proceeds from my business to them on an annual basis. And and in the process of giving reparations, there's a lot of different approaches to this, and there's a lot of different organizations that kind of will help sort out what's the right process. And but I basically just I had a meeting, and I told them that's what I wanted to do, um, and they accepted. And they had already put an invite out to the community to raise some money for to buy the building that they will store their research and their library of archives in, and where they work out of. And so, I didn't expect anything from them. And but anyway, over that time, we've been developing kind of a relationship. And that's something that I feel like has just, it's felt good to me. It feels right to do. And I'm able to profit, on land that was traditionally Abenaki land. And I live here, and I feel like it's just one small way to kind of equalize that platform a little bit. But there's a number of different people that are actually giving land over, or they write in their lease or their deed or their will rather, when they pass away, they want the land to go back into Abenaki hands. There's also tremendous amount of people that are giving land to Black farmers and young Black individuals that really want to be integrated and on land and steward land and grow food as a part of their own process of, just transition or their own calling. And Soul Fire Farm, there's some great, and we can talk about this with the discussion. I realize I need to wrap it up so we can actually have a discussion. We're getting there. I think this is my last slide. Oh, so this is an example of regenerative economy. It's a whole field out there. It gives me a lot of hope, just in the fact that this is being modeled as a circle. These are just the principles of a regenerative economy, so that we're also being able to apply these. We have to be able to shift our economic system so that we don't just extract all the resources and exploit people, right? Okay, so reflections on resilience. A mature culture is one with vision. Black Elk was one of the first to write this in his famous book, Black Elk Speaks. And also Peter Bain has kind of translated this into some of his work with permaculture. We have to kind of be able to focus on solutions and not get bogged down in the amount of work that we're really up against and what we have to do. Yeah, and then we have to learn from nature. I feel like that's been the biggest inspiration for me, and recognize that we're a part of nature, and therefore a lot of what we produce we have this within us. We are not built to exploit and extract. And we can cultivate the long view and recognize that small and so slow solutions really build towards change. And the more that we can kind of shift in our own world and get out of our comfort zone and grow, we'll take that growth to the different avenues and venues and circles that we fluctuate in. So here are some important projects to know about. The Winter Center for Indigenous Traditions. They don't have a website, but they're based in Hanover, and they're awesome and really great people. The Everytown Project. This is a new emerging project where they're working on every town in Vermont actually having land that is completely BIPOC owned and operated. So this is a part of a reparations effort that is a multi kind of diversified approach of a lot of different groups working together. And they really want to work cooperatively so there's land in every town that it will actually get turned over into ownership. And then there's a community of support and allies that can kind of form around that. But it's kind of exciting, and to see that happening here. Vermont is becoming quite a leader in this way. The Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition just started a series called Stories from the North, and it's an incredible program. It's all free. You can get the recordings. It's all on the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition website. And there's some great introductions from the previous years where there's some Abenaki elders that come on and share some land practices. So I highly recommend that. There's a Regeneration Core, which is a project that I'm involved with getting going. And this is kind of connecting students with farmers and teachers to focus on regenerative principles, mostly focused on agriculture and as a solution to climate change. But just transition is at the core of this project. And what we're hoping to do is, like, if students are wanting more information and experience and knowledge around how to kind of what are the aspects of just transition or regenerative agriculture, we want to give them opportunities to learn from the experts right here in Vermont. And so we already have a couple projects going, and some students from Thetford and the Sharon Academy and other places are engaging with this work. It's very exciting. The Center for Grassroots Organizing is an incredible collective just outside of Montpelier. And initially, when we were doing this program, I was going to try to get some Abenaki voices involved to talk about land practices and land stewardship. But fortunately for us, it's happening in other venues. So on February 25th, A Just Transition in Community Organizing and Education is a discussion that's taking place. And then on March 18th is this, actually Everytown Project is going to be presenting on how they're doing and what's up and how to support. And you can find all that information on Facebook or at the website for the Center for Grassroots Organizing. Wow, okay, I talked longer than I expected. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and allow us all just to kind of take a breath. If I know I shared a lot, and I'm really hoping that if you had some good thoughts to share, I didn't miss the opportunity for you to share them. But I would love to hear some thoughts and reflections and and feedback or questions or anything, about anything that I've said. And maybe we can just have a quick go around, and I'd love to give everyone just a moment to at least share their name and where they're joining us from. Yeah, hi, Leah.
Hi, could I don't want to trespass on knowledge that is privileged, but could I ask you how you have integrated Abenaki strategies of planting into your work?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've done is I went to the Hartford Historical Society, where actually there's a fair amount of Abenaki kind of knowledge and history, and I talked with them about some trees that we were planting for a project called the Upper Valley Apple Corps. We were planting fruit and nut trees for free and public picking around the Upper Valley. And I wanted to make sure we were doing it in such a way that honored what they wanted to see growing here. And so they educated me about chestnuts. And so, because it was right after the American chestnut, because of course the blight happened, and then it took 17 years to recreate those genetics to have a blight resistant variety. And so they basically said to me at that moment, like, the apple thing is kind of like Johnny Appleseed and spreading apples, and it has this like colonial thing to it, but the nuts we're really into. And so I've been learning from that, and trying to incorporate that knowledge. I went back to the group and I said, we should probably change our name. This is not really necessarily in accordance with this group. And it's been a long process, and there's a lot of different opinions on that. But so that's one way. And then just really developing relations so that like with the Winter Center, they've given me some books on, different growing practices and different seeds. And what I'm hoping to do this year is a lot of it has been around annual vegetables, like learning about how when the fish used to run in these rivers, they would put the fish in their mound, whereas like I use fish emulsion. And obviously these practices have also evolved and adapted. Not every Abenaki person is still doing this, but there are doing it in some cultural centers. But so they would bury the fish and then plant the corns, beans, and squash around that. But also doing furrows. So like there's trenches that are planted next to the beds so that when the rains come, those would filter into the beds. I've been learning about that a little bit. So really it's been a slow process of me just kind of like showing up and asking questions and like, hoping that they'll share information with me. And because I know that generations previous, actually, especially the Mashpee Wampanoag were the ones that are kind of known for welcoming the Pilgrims. They shared a lot of information with the settlers, and a lot of that, of course, got then used against them or was exploited. So it's a very sensitive thing, and I just try to be as respectful as I can and hope to build trust and say, if you share this with me, I'll hold it in a way that is valued, and I'm not going to use it. So, I mean, those are just some of the ways, but a lot of the nut actually, when we planted the nuts, and I've now kind of developed a relationship with someone where, he teaches me a lot about the traditional ways of harvesting, like wild ramps, looking for wild ginger. Ginseng used to kind of decorate this whole landscape around the Upper Valley. And so they say, like, if I find anything, I'm always called them, oh, I think I found the ginseng or or ginger. And, so just really kind of, forming those. Yeah. But I would love to hear, like, if other people have knowledge and, around these land practices or have had good luck, integrating them. Thank you so much for your question. or anything. Anyone, people are welcome to share anything at this point too. Or if there's one piece of knowledge, or was this new to you, or is it kind of helpful? Or
Karen, my name is Anna. Hello. Thank
hi.
you. I came to all four. I watched the first one after the fact because I messed up the date. It was my first mistake of 2021. It still haunts me. In my experience in Zoom groups, it's hard to know when to introduce yourself unless someone is asking folks if they want to. For my part, I'm happy to go first, or if Jared or you want to call on people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know it's hard just to jump in. I'm happy to call on people, but I also want to respect if people don't want to share.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Anna? And then after you,
Okay.
if anyone would like to introduce yourself, you can just kind of indicate that you'd like to, and then go ahead. And we'll rely on democracy and serendipity to make it all work out.
My name's Anna. Thank you for the programming. I would say I learned the most in this one only because I could not keep up with the soil biology one. One kind of went this way. I recently bought a 0.3 acre lot with a house in White River Junction, and have been working to put a lot of plants into this landscape, which is just a lawn. So I'm just working to convert that. And that is how I came upon permaculture, and a friend sent me the series. And yeah, I'm 1 year into that journey. And I am trying also to incorporate some market gardening practices because I would like to escape wage labor, whether through producing enough food to have sort of a different demand on myself, or through actually selling food.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Susan looks ready.
No. Well, the term was new to me. Am I muted? No, the term was new to me in the sense of it's only recently sort of appeared, but I grew up in wartime England, and I have to admit the practices are totally familiar, and I still practice them. I waste nothing. It's just the way I garden. And I don't have a huge garden. It's less than half an acre, but it's amazingly productive.
Wonderful.
And I'm just going to interpolate here for anyone who is listening that Susan Edwards is the head of the Hanover Garden Club. And in March, we will be running a kind of a virtual garden tour of her garden through the season, with commentary by her / virtual flower show featuring flower photos by another photographer. So yeah, that will go out to everyone. So keep your eye out if you'd like a different sort of gardening program. We have one coming up in March. And actually, while I'm on this roll in April, we're going to be doing a couple of programs with an herbalist who will be talking about herbs and their uses and growing them, and different things you can do with herbs. So we do have more gardening programs coming down the road.
Wonderful. That's awesome. I can't wait to see your garden, Susan. That's a
Well,
I was just gonna say, I wish we could all tour each other's gardens.
Well, you're welcome anytime. I'm only doing end of February through mid-June, and it's literally going to be the evolving spring. But I'm looking forward. We've only got a week, and it's the end of February, so I'm studying my pussy willow as we speak to see if it's
I love it. Awesome. Does anyone else feel called to share a little something? I'd love to hear. I know it's 4:30. If you have to go, you will not be, obviously, like, thank you so much for staying and coming and joining. But I would love, if people do have the time, I'd love to hear a little bit.
Hi, Karen. My name is Chris Brown, and I'm in Bradford. And I really enjoyed your series. I need to go back and watch it all again. I am like Anna. I've eliminated most of the grass on my property, and I'm using wild strawberries and clover to replace the grass. I'm trying to go 100% natural because I read the Ptolemy books, if I'm remembering his name right. And he's really made an impression on me. I think I do a lot of permaculture just because everything's all jumbled on my property. But all mixed, you know, trees, shrubs, herbs. And what I absolutely enjoyed the most was last week's lecture about wood chips. I had a logger come to my property and limb some trees and cut down some small seedling poplars. And he was going to blow the wood. They chipped the trees on site and blow them into a trailer. And I said, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm going to blow these into the trailer and cart them away. And it's like, no, blow them right there in my garden and I'll deal with them. And then I asked him, I said, hey, would you sell me a trailer full of wood chips? And he did for $50, which I thought was quite the bargain. And I have been spreading wood chips like crazy and loving them. It's just phenomenal. So I really appreciated that part of your lecture last session.
You were diddled. They usually give them away, Chris.
Oh, well, I got a whole trailer full and I was happy to give him the $50.
Yeah, they're starting to pick up on the fact that like they're so good. So many gardeners are now wanting them.
I live on an island of sand. Plateau Acres in Bradford was what I was told when I moved here during the age of the glaciers. And as the glaciers started to melt, it was an island of sand. The Waits River goes by me and the Connecticut River is like 2 miles away. And so it's very hard gardening because things dry out quickly, even if we get a lot of rain. And I have what I call the point. It's a piece of land. I own a gully. So my point goes out in a point, and then there's steep slopes going down to Route 5 or steep slopes going down to the gully. And it's been really hard on the point because it's dry shade. Wood chips have changed my world. The leaves that I would shred and try and lay down in the fall would just blow away with the winter winds. Wood chips do not blow away. Mm-hmm. They are phenomenal. If you can get your hands on some, use them liberally.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I've just seen the way they build soil. It's phenomenal. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris.
You're welcome.
What are you thinking up there, June? Or Jane, sorry, I thought it was a you.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to your my name is Jane Bedford, and I was listening to your program through a program I heard over the last 2 days about the Arctic and all the problems they're having there with difficulties with using too much oil and too many things that are causing the problems that we have with climate change. And listening to the way they worked through it, it was a program that had a lot of young people, or not young people, but people who were involved in living on the Arctic and how their lives are changing. And if it's small things with the group, they're able to solve the problem fairly easily among the group. But as soon as it becomes major problems with major, US, China, Russia, other people who want to take over their area and not pay any attention to the people who are living there, then the problems become more excessive. And listening to your way of working through things, first on a small principle and then on the larger one, or trying to work on the larger one, is very fascinating. And just, I was fitting you in with everything else, or trying to.
Yeah. Way to integrate.
Well, it's integrated.
It's a process, I know. Thank you for sharing.
Karen.
Yes. Hi, Susan.
Ross in Pomfret. Yeah, I popped in a little bit late, but glad to have gotten here. Thanks for all the great info. So a few years ago, I planted a bird row, and I put some high bush cranberry and elderberry and some winterberry and some other things that I didn't write it down, so I don't know what they are now. But the cedar waxwings have just come and cleaned off all the high bush cranberries.
Wow.
So they went from flying into an apple tree down to the high bush cranberries, and then they'd fly back up all, like 40 or 50 at a time, flashy, gorgeous birds, up into a high ash tree that hangs over the driveway. And they must have eaten and done all their dropping, because it was dotted, in hundreds of places with the little red berries. It was just so gorgeous and generous of them. So they're all out there working, doing their acts of beauty. And I wanted to say one more thing. Last year, I started putting wood chips liberally in the pathways of my veggie garden. My son has a mountain of wood chips because he's in the business. I happened to notice in the soil for the first time a lot of tiny little worms in clumps. And I'd never seen that before. And I've worked with the elements here for 40 years. And here come these little clumps of short worms, like in a little nest. And I don't know what they were.
Oh gosh, I hope they're not snake worms.
Yeah, you mentioned them last week or 2 weeks ago, and so snake worms. Okay, thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, they might be. And actually, with all of us that use wood chips so much, it's really important that we're like I think I told the story here. I tried to get some wood chips through V-Trans, like right down the road from my house. Like I literally was like, did the same thing that we were talking about, like, oh, can you just dump those over there? And they said they're sending them all up to somewhere in Fairleigh where they have to get inspected now to make sure that they don't have snake worms, because that's a problem that I don't think we're quite certain how to really even address right now. Like
well,
what
I'll
the
Google
natural.
it and see how they reproduce then.
Yeah, good luck. I hope that they're not, for your sake. And thank you for your story about the cedar waxwings. I always those cranberries are on there for so long. I'm always like, aren't the birds hot? But I think if they just wait, it's because till now. But yeah, that's really great.
Yeah. Sometimes the birds show up and sometimes they don't. It's not every year.
Yeah.
But anyway, greatly looking forward. I'm about to get my vegetable seeds from High Mowing. And I'm going to have a really good setup in my cellar this year with lights and heating pads. And so, whoops, it's all coming around.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I look forward. We should all try to reconnect and do garden talk tour.
So we'll have to get on the whole gardening thing here with Jared and follow month by month.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else feel like open to sharing anything? And like I said, we'll follow up with the surveys so that you can, provide feedback in another way. But if you want to take an opportunity, we'd love to hear your voice and any take homes.
How are people's bees doing this year? I see your bee on the wall. So
yes,
hanging on the wall.
It is. That's my my costume I wear at the parades to raise awareness about the bees.
Oh.
Yeah, I've heard both good and bad from people that I don't have bees here, but I've heard both. Some when they don't know yet. Actually, that's been the feedback I've been getting.
Yeah, it's too soon to check.
Yeah. Oh, good. And Sue is writing in the chat. Okay, well, I don't want to, thank you all so much for your time. And thank you, Kelsey and Sue, for your comments. Appreciate that. But yeah, I
Thank
think,
you for your talk.
thank you so much, Jane. I really get so much out of these, and just to interact with people around these topics. And I feel like we could probably extrapolate on so many different things and our personal gardens and all this stuff. And I hope I wasn't too preachy for everyone this time, getting on the high horse.
Well, it's good for us to hear, obviously.
Good. I hope so. I hope so.
Well, you have a good flow with your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
joining us.
Thanks, Jared.
Take
Yeah,
care.
thank
Hope
you
to
so
see you
much,
again.
Jared and Megan.
Jared, send us those, oh, I want to see Susan's garden. So I
Okay,
don't know,
yeah.
I'm
I'm
not
gonna
part of the
send-
Howe Library, so I want
I'll
to make
send
sure
the
to still,
information around to everyone.
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Bye, Anna. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
again, Karen.
Thank you so much. Okay. I know, just waiting for people. You have everything you need too, Jared, right? Did I give you an, I think you sent, oh, you asked for my address. I sent that to you.
Yes, I do have that. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so if I make a little survey with the Google form tomorrow, I'll just send that your way and you'd be able to send it
Yeah.
out to everyone?
We'll
Okay.
send it to the whole list, which at this point, given all the people who reached out for all of the different programs, it's like 70 or 80 people. So I'll
Wow.
send it out to everyone and we'll see
Okay.
how many responses we get. I'll be curious.
Yeah, there's usually like a handful, but I don't know. I think it's helpful. Yeah.
What kinds of questions are you going to ask?
I think I'm going to ask, like, if people like learn something new, like what they got out of the presentation and like how they, like, for me personally, that's the feedback that I like, is like, was the information pertinent to you and why you came? Do you feel like, you know, they, like, I want to know people are able to like contextualize the information and like ground it in their gardening practices,